Greetings everyone, and welcome to a series where we explore the possibility that we all have an additional layer of physics that we never knew existed, and therefore, potentially, capabilities that we never knew existed. In my previous video, I identified this layer as a type of torus, which I've labelled a grey hole torus. The grey hole torus, or toroidal physics, could be the undiscovered deeper level that solves the biggest problem in physics, known as quantum gravity. It could also explain the physics behind extraordinary powers of the mind, as well as the physics behind the idea of higher dimensional realities and higher dimensional beings. What's more, empirical evidence in support of toroidal physics already exists and could be easily verified by physicists. The evidence of which I speak is the evidence produced by psi experiments. In episode 1, I discussed the experimental results obtained by parapsychologists. I also mentioned the potential consequences if similar results could be obtained by physicists conducting their own psi experiments. It could usher in a new era of science and a new era of healing based on the discovery that separation is an illusion. My intention is to motivate someone through these videos to sponsor and organize psi experiments conducted by physicists. So in this episode, we will dive into more detail regarding these experiments, and in the next episode, we'll take a look at why a positive outcome for psi is likely to take physicists in the direction of toroidal physics. In 2018, Etsel Cardania, a professor of psychology at Lund University in Sweden, published a meta-analysis of plus-minus 1,700 psi experiments, which had been published in peer-reviewed journals and conducted in roughly 4 dozen laboratories around the world, and had involved about 10,000 participants. In this video, parapsychologist Dean Radin presents the results of the meta-analysis, indicating that each of these forms of extrasensory perception has exceeded the well-known probability standard called 5 sigma, or 99.99994% in numerical terms. 5 sigma is the probability standard required to claim the discovery of a new particle in physics, such as the Higgs boson in 2012. It's a very high standard, which the physics community has imposed on itself, since they need to be very certain before making any change to the standard model. In this meta-analysis, telepathy experiments exceeded this premium standard by a factor of 300 million. In this video, Dr. Radin describes how he conducted some of the experiments that were included in Etsel Cardania's meta-analysis. His telepathy experiments involved 2 people, referred to as the sender and receiver. The receiver is placed in a state of sensory deprivation, which looks something like this. A red light is shining on the face, and the eyes are covered with ping-pong balls cut in half, so they see nothing but pink and hear nothing but white noise, which is played through headphones. This is known as the Ganzfeld method, and has been the most successful in maximizing the potential for positive psi results. Once the receiver is in this state, a picture is chosen by a random number generator, and the sender is then asked to imagine sending this image to the mind of the receiver. This goes on for about 20 minutes, during which time the receiver verbalizes any perceptions that may arise, for example, animal or grey in this particular case. These are recorded, and when the 20 minutes is up, they are played back to the receiver, who is then required to choose an image from a selection of 4 that most closely matches their perceptions. If there was no telepathy involved, the only thing in play would be chance, and the receiver would have a 1 in 4 or 25% chance of guessing the correct image. So, after conducting the experiment a good number of times, the cumulative hit rate of successful selections would stabilize at around 25%. But that's not what has happened. After 122 experiments in 20 laboratories, comprising 4,674 sessions of the type I have just described, the hit rate has stabilized at about 32%. This is a small but significant effect and seems to indicate that ordinary people are slightly telepathic, because ordinary people were used in the experiments. Dean Radin notes that if he selects out people from the database who are predisposed towards telepathic abilities, then the hit rate is more like 50 to 60%. The next experiment covered in Radin's video is the phenomenon called presentiment, which is a bodily response prior to an emotional experience. This response is measured through skin conductance, similar to a lie detector. Intuitively, this sounds impossible, because how can an effect precede its cause? But the results are clear. The experimental procedure goes like this. Firstly, the participant, who is seated in front of a blank computer screen, presses a button. The computer waits 5 seconds, then randomly selects and displays a photo for 3 seconds. The photo can be either an emotionally positive image, an emotionally negative image, or a calm image. The participant then waits for at least 10 seconds and then presses the button again. A so-called session normally comprises 30 to 40 such trials. Now let's look at a graph of the results, recorded from the moment that the photo is displayed, which is the stimulus. There are no surprises here. When a calm image is displayed, there is very little bodily reaction. And when an emotional image is displayed, there is a significant increase in skin conductance, because arousal in the participant results in some perspiration. But if we look at the skin conductance before the photo is displayed, then we see a very surprising result. The participant registers some arousal a few seconds before seeing the photo. This yellow region indicates the presentiment effect, and we can see that the skin conductance is significantly higher for emotional images than calm images. Bear in mind that the computer randomly selects the image immediately prior to displaying it, so the presentiment occurs even before the choice of image has been made. I've now shown you 2 types of experiment, one that transcends space and one that transcends time. These are just 2 experiments out of many that seem to have done everything required by the scientific community in order to be taken seriously. The results have exceeded the 5 sigma probability standard. They have been included in a well-written research article, ideally authored by a respected academic. They have passed the peer review process and have been published in a top-tier mainstream science journal, in this case the American Psychologist, which is the flagship journal of the American Psychological Association. This is the procedure that needs to be followed by anybody wishing to have their research recognized by the scientific community. So the publication of such an article in a top-tier journal is like a stamp of approval from official representatives of mainstream science. This stamp of approval would apply to statements in the abstract like this. The evidence provides cumulative support for the reality of psi, which cannot be readily explained away by the quality of the studies, fraud, selective reporting, experimental or analytical incompetence, or other frequent criticisms. The evidence for psi is comparable to that for established phenomena in psychology and other disciplines, although there is no consensual understanding of them. These are distinct conclusions that now have a stamp of approval, and I would argue that this evidence has not only been marked as approved, it's been marked, by implication, as extraordinary, because everybody involved with the publication of this article would have been aware of the adage that applies to such phenomena, that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. This includes parapsychologists who have developed rigorous quality controls over the last few decades in response to their many critics who assume that there must be something wrong with their experiments. The fact that the article was not rejected immediately after submission was a surprise to Cardenio. After all, parapsychological evidence had only ever been accepted for publication once before, 7 years earlier, when this article was published in another top-tier mainstream journal, the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. The article, authored by Darrell Bem, outlined his results in 9 different types of presentiment experiments. This publication sparked outrage in the scientific community. This outrage was not directed towards Darrell Bem as much as it was towards the editorial board of one of psychology's most respected journals for agreeing to publish a paper presenting what its author describes as strong evidence for extrasensory perception. The decision was mortifying scientists, according to this New York Times article, and generating a mixture of amusement and scorn. In another article, the journal's editors came under direct fire from a professor of cognitive science for not seeming to understand the implications of publishing such an article, because if any of Darrell Bem's claims were true, then all of the bases underlying contemporary science would be toppled, and we would have to rethink everything about the nature of the universe. The American Psychologist is a sister publication of the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, in the sense that they are both published by the American Psychological Association. All this outrage and criticism would surely have weighed heavily on the minds of the editorial board of the American Psychologist as they went about the process of reviewing Cardenio's article. Reputations were on the line, and apparently so were all the bases underlying contemporary science. The review process for this extraordinary claim would surely have been extraordinarily stringent. Indeed, it lasted more than a year, according to Professor Cardenio.
It was the most difficult review process of, I have published more than 300 papers. This was easily the most difficult one. But they published it, and I was very appreciative because I thought this shows a lot of guts.
So we can see that the evidence for psi has met the high standards required to be taken seriously. Yet parapsychology continues to be criticized as being a pseudoscience, and the majority of mainstream scientists reject it. There is, of course, a way to settle this controversial topic, and that is to have psi experiments conducted jointly by psi-friendly scientists and psi-skeptic scientists. Leading these two teams would be a psi-friendly theoretical physicist and a psi-skeptic theoretical physicist, since the results could precipitate a major paradigm shift in physics. Given the level of public and professional interest in the outcome, I believe a sponsor and organizer shouldn't be hard to find. In the next episode, we'll take a look at how psi experiments could revolutionize physics.